Good day, YouTube. JD here, back for the last Wednesday that I will appear on the show until January, because the holidays are upon us and Yule is pretty much here. So for you guys who celebrate Yule, happy Yule. It is upon us. Without further ado, let's get straight into this question because it's a very long question. It comes from Tristan, and Tristan appears to be a philosophy student. And in Tristan's class, he mentions that his classmates, they talk about God quite a bit, and the idea is that God, the idea of God, even the word in and of itself, the word God is a bit of a situation, because the reason why I call it a situation is because I've got friends that speak other languages. I've got a friend who speaks Arabic, and he mentions that in his language, the word God is described in far more detail. The English word God doesn't really do the term God justice. There's a whole lot more to gods and goddesses than just the word God. In this country, in America, the Christian reign of power has pretty much conquered the word God. So when it comes to paganism, a lot of people think of the Christian God when they hear the word God in schools and churches and even on the street. So I believe that's the prime reason behind pagan gods not being discussed in schools and colleges and universities unless you specifically seek out a class that does such a thing. Now, Tristan's question discussed whether or not gods are all-knowing, indestructible, and can they be everywhere at once. That's kind of that was within the question, and I feel like the answer is no for all three. Because to me, the situation with gods and goddesses, I believe it's more of an ascension process. I actually have a couple qualifiers, 6 of them actually, that to me qualifies a being to be a god. And one of them is the ability to not be destroyed or incapacitated easily. And I bring this up because there are a number of beings, for those of you who are in the paranormal side of things, if you understand Dybbuk boxes, if you understand jinn, if you understand jinns and the way they can be bound to certain things, you can't, as far as I understand, you can't take a god and bind it to anything. You can't take a Dybbuk box and bind an actual god to the box. Whereas you can do that with lesser, with lesser beings that are somewhere between a spirit and a deity, but not quite a god just yet. If that makes any sense, these are beings that are beyond that for unknown reasons. I can't even really give you the reason why they can't be tied to these devices. I have given it some thought, and I feel like it may have something to do with the fact that they may be able to split their consciousness into separate energy bodies on the astral realm, and that also goes into one of my other qualifiers for being a god. They have to be able to travel the astral realm incredibly fast. This kind of ties into people who believe that gods are omnipresent, being everywhere at once. Their ability to move around the astral realm at such high speeds mean that when you call on them, when you need them, they can be there, or they can spill off a part of their consciousness temporarily to be with you if you have such an agreement where they pour that much energy into your well-being. This is where the conversation kind of almost goes into libations and offerings. In other magical arts, you approach a god, a deity, a goddess, and ask for something to be done. And there's an energetic exchange. It is my belief that these gods and goddesses and deities use these offerings to replenish their energy. So that goes into another qualifier of mine and answers one of Tristan's questions. Are they all powerful? And as you might already guess, based off of my viewpoint, they aren't all powerful because they need these items to replenish their power reserves. Now, whether they're holding on to their power for much more heavy lifting, such as war with another god, and they don't want to burn up that energy, so they kind of rely on you to give the offering to keep their current power level stable, or that way they're always going above the red line, they're always growing in power. That could be the case, but it's been my experience that they need these libations in order to get the process to come to a close, so that way you can achieve what you asked for or to get you out of the situation that you were in. So that answers that. Not all powerful. We've talked about whether or not they're omnipresent, if they can be everywhere at once. Are they all knowing? Now, that is an interesting question. I feel like they aren't all knowing. There have been situations where I've heard that certain older gods aren't aware of the names of our cell phones. They aren't aware of the names and brands of the vehicles that we drive. That tells me that they have kind of been out of touch with our current realm here, this waking realm, whatever you want to call the realm that I'm living in right now and you're viewing me on, the waking realm, this dense realm where I'm tied to this flesh body, where my consciousness, my soul is riding my brain and my spine, and I'm in this body. They aren't aware of small things such as brand names, item names, unless they put some energy into learning about that. Now, there could be other gods and deities out there that I haven't come in contact with, and then somehow they're reading some kind of daily newspaper or our daily newspaper and they're getting into all this. But it's been my experience that they don't know these things. Also, it's possible to build astral realms where they may not even have the ability to connect with, which kind of pushes them outside of that qualifier. So I do believe that they aren't all knowing for those reasons that I've just stated. However, one of my qualifiers for a being to become or to be a god or to maintain that status of God is they have to have a vast amount of knowledge, and that vast amount of knowledge is tied to them being on this planet at one point in a flesh body, and then ascending to another plane of existence and becoming more of a spirit being, and keeping this knowledge that they learned while they were in their flesh body, and in their new life on the astral realms, they've begin to pick up more knowledge. That knowledge could be anything from healing wounds to combat knowledge. This knowledge is what makes them who they are, and they hold on to it and they build it up, and that makes them well and above any human that's in a flesh body who may or may not have had multiple lives here on this planet. Don't forget, I have talked about it before, I do subscribe to the idea of reincarnation, and I believe that when you die, you do come back in a new flesh body. These gods and goddesses and deities have done that multiple times. They're done with that particular part of the evolution, and they've moved on to a higher plane where they're seen as these beings who can affect people on multiple magical and physical levels, which also brings me to another one of my qualifiers. I believe that a god or a goddess or deity has to have the ability, or actually has already in the past affected the lives of many beings, usually lesser beings such as me and you, and the people in our families. They've affected them by saving them when they needed to be saved, or in some cases, if there's a particular war with a particular deity and that god is against that god, they may have actually gotten tied up in a natural disaster and ended up falling and getting reincarnated because of a death. So gods and goddesses and deities in my book, they take that kind of responsibility of affecting these lives, and they shoulder that responsibility that goes into their kind of their summary of who they are and what they've done, which also leads me to my next qualifier. Gods and goddesses and deities, they need to be known by their deeds by other gods and goddesses. Other gods and goddesses should know this person by their name, by the way they look, or what they've done. And humans should also know who they are by what their name, by their likeness, what they've done. It's kind of like a lore-based thing. It's part of, in my mind, it's part of following that ascension ladder up to the point of godhood. So far, if you're a bit confused, because I know this is kind of some abstract and some really weird concepts here when we're talking about God and philosophy and whether or not they're omnipresent, but I feel like humans are kind of down here. You'll have a spirit that could be here because the spirit can travel the astral realm at very high speeds, and you and I can't because we're tied to our flesh bodies. Someone who has kind of gone back and forth between this flesh body level and the spirit level has finally amassed enough knowledge. So now they've reached this kind of third level where they're in between being a god and then being a spirit and then being a human down here. So they've gone back and forth. They've died, they've come back, they've died, they've come back, and they finally have reached a level where they're actually able to affect people's lives, make allegiances with other gods and deities on the astral realm, and now they're kind of in a demigod, if you will, kind of state where depending on which decisions they make for whatever amount of time they have. It could be centuries, it could be eons. It just depends on their particular evolution and their track of ascension. They can move up to the level of God or deity, depending on what kind of allegiances, what kind of deeds and things that they do in order to keep climbing. And somewhere in this level, before you get to God, and right after spirit, is going to kind of be that angelic level. Although I feel like angels are their own kind of species in and of themselves, but you kind of get the idea that you can be something like a guardian angel, which is more like a spirit, but you can also kind of keep moving up to become a god. And you might be wondering, well, what's the difference between a god and a spirit? Well, in my mind, a god can't be destroyed. It's really hard to destroy them completely, whereas a spirit is going to have that situation where they're going to have to make that decision to go back into a flesh body at one point. And a spirit can be bound. The spirit can be captured. The spirit can be kind of corralled and moved around. Gods and goddesses, they can be offended, they can be repelled, but you can't really destroy them. It's not easy to defeat them in that way. That should be all of my qualifiers for, you know, what makes a god or a goddess or a deity. I feel like it's a very good question to end off the year on, because it's a very complicated question, and I hope I've made sense of at least the way I feel about it. If you find yourself intrigued or confused, I would love to know your comments down there, so we can get a dialogue going. I really want to know what you all think, whether or not you believe in one God, if you believe in gods. If you don't believe in anything, I want to know what you think, because if that's what we're here to do, we're here to discuss these things. If you have a personal relationship with a god or goddess, and you can either disagree with me or agree, I want to know your thoughts. Let's get some comments down there. Let's and then also share the video. Share the video with a friend or somebody. If you feel like I'm saying exactly what you think, share it with them, you know, and then we'll all get in here and start having discussions about this particular conversation. Thanks so much for watching the video. I can't wait to start answering wonderful questions like this sometime next year. Thanks so much, and blessed be.